Huh.
Watching Kyle's unboxing videos again?
Yeah, he always finds the coolest... No way! A robot dog! Gotta ask where he got it.
Or use your Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. Just draw a circle around the dog on your screen, and it shows you where to buy it right in the app.
Oh, I just learned a new trick. And that for once, I beat Kyle to the next big thing.
Circle it, find it with the new Galaxy S24 Ultra and circle the search with Google. Get yours now at Samsung.com. Internet connection required. Results may vary based on visuals.
Why wait to see if you'll get something you like this Valentine's Day when you can go to BlueNile.com and find something you'll love? Whether you're looking to treat yourself to a little winter sparkle or show a galentine how much you appreciate them, Blue Nile offers a wide selection of high-quality designs, expert guidance, and free 30-day returns for the ultimate peace of mind. You can even design your own jewelry. Right now, save up to 50% at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com.
Back with another episode of the Blue Turf. It has not been a exceptionally happy time for Comets fans. This is Thad Bell from the Kansas City Soccer Journal, and with me, Eric Bergrud. How are you, sir?
I am doing great. Once again, we are not at the world-famous Kansas City Soccer Dome, but Zoom will have to do.
And I just announced you as Eric Bergrud because I've announced you in so many different ways, but I guess now I could say that you're a star of MASL video. How about that?
Well, thanks. No, the league reached out to me for a new series called 10 for 10. We debuted it last week with Commissioner Keith Tozer, and the premise is simple. It's the league's 10th anniversary. They wanted 10-minute interviews with 10 individuals who played some roles either out front or behind the scenes in those 10 years. And so these will drop on Fridays at noon Eastern, 11 o'clock Central time, so 11 a.m. Kansas City time. Shelley Clark will be the second guest, and she had all sorts of interesting comments to make. We have several other guests lined up, including maybe one with an indirect Kansas City connection and a surprise guest with a Kansas City connection. So stay tuned. I didn't want to be a homer, so it's not too much a Kansas City series. It's a league series.
Well, it's cool. I watched the one with Keith. He's always a good interview. He's so knowledgeable about the game. And I don't know if I've ever told you this story, but one of the most impressive coaching things I've watched was Keith Tozer, when he was the national futsal coach, gave a clinic here in Kansas City, and he had some sporting juniors academy, whatever they were termed at that time, kids there to be running the demo. And just I watched him step through, like each little set piece and how to react to it and how to do this. And it was futsal related, but it was so very indoor soccer related in how he was approaching it and how to set up for restarts and free kicks and things like that. So it was just really knowledgeable, and I really appreciated watching it.
Well, and we talked off camera about his legacy, and so I touched on several of his former players who are coaching in the MASL, but he also mentioned that he coached Leo Gibson with that futsal team too. So if you think about people who played for him primarily in Milwaukee, Eddie Puskaric played for him with the Los Angeles Lasers, but several players played with him on the U.S. futsal team. And so the skills they learned, the drills that you talked about, that he approached as futsal coach, have definitely impacted multiple teams in the MASL.
Definitely. It's I've seen that go across, and like you said, from either people learning from him just as an opponent or as him coaching them. So he's a great coach. Anyway, this is not a totally MASL focused pod. Was there anything I missed? We should have.
No, just stay tuned. It's on dropping every Friday on the MASL YouTube channel, and they're hyping it on their social accounts. So keep an eye out for Shelley Clark episode 2, and we'll slowly release more names. The news release they put out mentioned that Ryan Sigic is coming on too. We're still trying to figure out when I'm interviewing him, but stay tuned.
Cool. We'll be looking forward to it. And back to the actual Comets news, or not so much news now, but as the headline was, Comets fall apart late and lost to Utica City. A terrible minute there. Terrible
Yeah,
minute.
well, I think you can say for three quarters competitive, there were some mistakes they made that I'm sure Coach Stokic didn't like. But I mean, for me, I think what happened is the press worked for a long time, and then uh, Utica countered, and I think if you were to go back, you could watch the game on Twitch, the whole game, or you could kind of go back on MASL's X account where they post the videos of each goals. Watch closely from a perspective of what can be addressed in practice, and you'll see some things that probably Coach Stokic has been working on this week.
Yeah, I'm sure he has. I actually just was rewatching the game right before we started. I got up to uh in that 3 minute or that minute span when they gave up three goals. I was on the second goal when I deadly realized I had to start the Zoom. That was one where you had a lot of veterans on the field. The the two former MASL defenders of the year were on the field. Lucas Sosa was on the field. Ramon Palmer, I think, was on the field, and it was just they let a guy free into the box, nobody guarded him.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look, Coach Stokic in his post-game presser talked about concentration. I know you've got a clip from that event, but on a lot of the goals, it's concentration. And then I go back earlier in the game, there was a back pass to Neto that caught him wrong-footed, and he tried to kick it out, I believe, with his left foot right to Nelson Santana, and it scored. And so, I mean, part of it is just better ball management in your defensive third. Some of it is finishing. I thought Brian Wilkins had a terrific game, but the shot selection, I think, is something they could work on. And then in between those yellow lines is the transition game. And I think that Utica exploited this in both recent games. They were able to win the transition game in the second half of that game in Kansas City a couple weeks ago, and did the same thing late in the fourth quarter up in Utica.
It is now, I think, 5 games winless. I mean, the overtime loss, the
If you
three
count
in,
that as a loss, yeah, no, 5 games.
yeah. And it's not my decision to count them as losses; it's theirs. But yes, it's 5 games, and it's not a good trend right at the moment. Can they fix this?
Well, I was on MASL Monday. I've been busy this week, and I'd
You're all
mentioned
over the place, Eric.
if they had taken care of business against UCFC at home, I don't think the the mood would be as dire as it seems on social media platforms. I think
Yes.
that those were 2 points dropped at home. They weren't able to make this up. They knew going into the year that there was going to be this 6 game road trip, which was going to be really, really difficult. It was front loaded with the toughest games. You would hope to get something out of Utica. It didn't happen. But now, two teams that trail them in the Eastern Conference standings, Baltimore and St. Louis, those are winnable games. And so this is, for me, the critical weekend for Kansas City is how do you mentally forget the last 5 games and really focus on taking business one game at a time. And I mentioned on MASL Monday, you could look at the Mexico trip as warm up and practice for Baltimore because they've been challenged in recent years in Baltimore. I think how they played at Monterrey that second game, where they probably could have won, should have won, and didn't, uh, gives them something to build off of on a similarly sized field in Baltimore.
Yeah, it's kind of like coach speak sometimes. Like the next game is the most important game, and I know after the Mexico trip, coach had said this next game is the most important game because they needed to kind of get back on track, and they didn't. The next game is the most important game in this point because if they don't get on track, I don't want to say the season's lost, but they put themselves in a hole, and it's a confidence factor, and so many things can go wrong.
Well, if you look at the Eastern Conference standings, for me, it's maybe even more of a must win for Baltimore than Kansas City. So Kansas City's currently in fourth place, 7-5-1 record. Baltimore has 3 games in hand, 4-5-1 record. So they can move up with wins. If Kansas City beats them on Friday, that's like a 6-point swing for Kansas City. It gives them space to move up toward Milwaukee and more distance from Baltimore. Because right now, kudos to Harrisburg. They won their first game last weekend, but with a 1-10 record, they're not making the playoffs. St. Louis, it's been probably a really frustrating season for them. They had Empire late and gave that one away, and 2-8-3 records. So I think almost not quite mathematically, but getting close to mathematically, both those teams are done. Baltimore still has a chance, but the team they've got to leapfrog is Kansas City. So, yeah, I know what Coach Stokich said about that UCFC game, but now you've got to look forward. And Baltimore, to me, has a lot of pressure on, because if they lose this one, their fans have been frustrated. They're going to get even more frustrated. And Kansas City, if you look at where they are in the standings, they're 3 points behind Milwaukee with a game in hand. They win that one, and they're basically tied for third place. So it gives them options. I mean, for me at this point, make the top 4 and take your chances. But I mean, I think in an ideal world, you'd want to be at least a 2 seed, so that way you get some home field advantage rather than playing from behind the whole playoff schedule.
Well, they made that obviously much more difficult with having lost to Utica now twice.
They get a
To
third
move up.
chance, though. So circle your calendar for March 10th. They get a chance at home, and that will be huge. I don't want to say that's the third version of the most important game of the year, but right now they're all important, right? So you have 2 teams behind you this weekend, and then you come back home Friday and Saturday home with Tacoma and Empire, and then a scary game on February 16th against Chihuahua, one of the top 3 teams in the league for sure. And so you have to take care of business. You win all 5 of those, as the Comets are capable of doing, then that creates a little faded memory of the slide.
Oh yeah, it's definitely turnaroundable. That's not a word, is it? They can
Sounds
definitely
good
turn
enough.
around. They can definitely turn it around and be on the right track. It's just they have to do it, and
So, so
that
one of
will
the
take that
things,
focus.
yeah, one of the things I would point to is up front. So at the beginning of the season, 2 out of 3 cylinders were clicking, meaning 3 target players. You had Zach Reggett, Rion Marquez, and Leo Gibson. And in those early games, Leo came off the bench in the second half. Coach Stokish put 2 targets out on the field, created mismatches, and it was working at least for Zach and Rion really, really well. And then Rion got hurt. And then Leo got more time, and he's started to get back into the groove and scoring goals. He had 2 against Utica, but Reggett was held scoreless against Utica. Rion was held scoreless against Utica. And so expecting the midfielders to carry the load. I mean, if you look at teams that have been struggling, and in particular, I would say St. Louis, they've been struggling because they haven't had consistent finishing up front. There are higher expectations for the Comets, higher expectations for those 3. And so what I'm going to be looking for this weekend against Baltimore and St. Louis is, can all 3 of them score and score consistently? Because you look at where Zach Reggett is now, he's on pace to have by far the most goals he's ever scored in a season as a professional. And that's being held scoreless a few games, right?
Yeah,
So he had his last full season in Florida, he had 27 goals. Last year, when you combine a service between Florida, Harrisburg, and Kansas City, he had 27 goals. Just a shade past the midway point, he already has 21 goals. So he's carried a lot of the weight, but kind of like Tacoma, right? you can't expect Nick Pereira to score 100% of the time. You need the rest of the team to step up. And so it's going to be interesting to see what the production is this weekend and then moving forward.
Uh, Going back to Leo for a second, though, the two goals, what tied him for all-time Kansas City?
Yeah, with Kevin Ketter. So all-time, courtesy of Mike Kuhn from KC Soccer Journal, all-time, all competition. So that includes regular season and playoffs. So a big kudo to Leo for his longevity and his ability to score all throughout his career. And we'll definitely want to feature that on one of our in-game broadcasts, Nick Vassos and me, because it's really impressive what Leo Gibson has done over his career. And when you go back to conversations like we had last time about all-time players, all-time teams, I absolutely think you have to put Leo Gibson up there in terms of an all-time Kansas City indoor soccer team. He's been consistently superior throughout his career.
And then, like you said, thanks to Mike Kuhn from the Kansas City Soccer Journal for those stats that he continuously provides. I would love to actually get Mike on one of these Blue Turf episodes just to give him a little, I won't say FaceTime, but voice time.
Yeah, that would be great.
All right. I want to say, what else do we have to discuss? I mean, we've talked about the next game. We've talked about the last game. I don't want to like break down every single goal last time. That's probably pointless at this point.
Well, maybe we could look ahead to what we did the midseason review kind of
Kind of.
sort of last time, right?
Yeah.
And
I kept
we're gonna look
interrupting
back.
you. I kept distracting you
Yeah,
from it.
no, it's all good. But maybe we can look ahead a little bit on the schedule in terms of what the Comets face. So we mentioned that they have two games this weekend on the road. They go to Baltimore, Friday night game, and then they come back to St. Louis. I'm going to be interested to see Sunday at St. Louis how many Comets fans make the drive. There's no Chiefs football this Sunday, so hopefully there'll be a strong Comets turnout. And then three in a row at home. Tacoma always seems to play Kansas City tough here. That'll be a Friday night game on February 9th, and it's a back-to-back deal where Empire comes in. We'll get to see Marco Fabian in person on the 10th, and then Chihuahua on the 16th, and then they do the Southern California trip. So you look at these first five games, I would say, as a chunk. How many points do you get out of there? Ideally 15. But you absolutely have to get double digits out of these five games aggregate.
Yep.
Otherwise, you have real problems. You go into Southern California, and I'll actually be at that Kansas City San Diego game at Pachanga there, and then Empire 3 days later, and you need to get something out of that. You come home for St. Louis and then Utica. Can't look past St. Louis, but I think that they've been playing St. Louis better home and away this year than they have in recent years. And then circle that matchup March 10th at Cable Dome Arena against Utica. That's going to be critical because that's a 6-point swing either way. Back to St. Louis for the final time for St. Patrick's Day. I'm hoping to go to that game. And then the season finale. And it's going to be a doozy. It's San Diego Sockers, who haven't been here for a while,
Nope.
coming back to play the Comets. And if my memory serves me correctly, Thad Bell, the last time that San Diego played at Cable Dome Arena was not against the Comets. It was against the Florida Tropics in the COVID year MASL semifinals, where they won both games in the semifinal series, and a team that was near the bottom of the standings. To be clear, they had to play all their games on the road, so
Right.
they were a sub 500 team, but they wound up winning the championship, and that's going to be a doozy. And San Diego had themselves, let's just call it an interesting Sunday night. And so there's a lot of focus on that team. They've had multiple players suspended. The team got fined for stuff that happened in the Tacoma game, and the most recent Kansas City San Diego games have been a little testy on the field. And what do they say? You'll get two bites at the apple this season.
Is it a San Diego thing? I mean, it does seem like San Diego's involved in a lot of those games where things get crazy and wild.
Well, I mean, you can look at that as if you're a soccer fan, I think what you would say is we have a team that is so competitive, they want to win everything. And so that competitive spirit uh, bleeds out on the field. And if you're maybe an opposing fan, you have a different perspective on that. And so I've been watching some of the back and forth give and take on what happened Sunday night at Tacoma. If you haven't seen the game, go to Twitch, fast forward, do yourself a favor, just fast forward to like the last 2 minutes of regulation, and you'll see maybe the last 7 minutes, because then you can see, let's just say, a less than pleasant conversation between soccer's goalkeeper Boris Pardo and referee Shane Butler that led to an ejection and ultimately a 3-game suspension. And then you have a couple more red cards near the end of the game, some crazy goals at the end that salvaged the Sockers, and then they ultimately won it in overtime. But yeah, they seem to find themselves that in all sorts of interesting things. And perhaps this league needs a villain. And you know, I'm not saying the Sockers are, but I mean, Milwaukee has tried to paint Kansas, or Milwaukee fans have tried to paint Kansas City as a villain,
especially Neto.
Yeah, right. So, but franchise wise, I mean, there's this whole thing in Kansas City of villains proudly wearing villain sweatshirts now, since the rest of the country has Kansas City as a target. Well, maybe this league needs a villain team.
They may have more than one in the end, though, but it's so much good. Depends on which rivalry you have. San Diego obviously has been so good, so that contributes to it. You want to hate the team that's been really good, which is why
Sure.
more people hate the Chiefs right now than probably should. But
Well, and San Diego will tell you how many championships they've won. They have the stars on their shield. So they make no bones about that. They are the model, let's call it model franchise on the field. I think that's a safe way to call it in indoor soccer history. And it's hard to argue the championships that they've won. The trick is times have changed a little bit. If you go back a few years, San Diego had a long drought of championships. And now I think that the balance of power has shifted to Monterrey. San Diego has a lot to prove this season.
I think one of the things that you can definitely hand to San Diego, though, is longevity and the fact that they have been a franchise for how many straight years, I wonder?
I think they were off a little bit, but I mean, they go back to 1978 with a few years off before
Yeah.
they were resuscitated. But the thing about San Diego, historically, they've always been able to find free agents that they plug into their system and don't skip a beat. You go back into the 80s, and anybody who wants to have this conversation, I'd love to do it, that they sort of lucked in on Steve Jungle and Fernando Clavillo, because the Golden Bay Earthquakes at the time, they found themselves without a home, and San Diego lured them down, kept them in state, and the rest was history. But you go from that era to Tavoy Morgan, to Drew Ruggles, et cetera. They've always been able to plug and play and get great success on the field.
And I was crediting San Diego for the longevity and being around forever, but Milwaukee, I think, is actually the team that's been around the longest.
Yeah,
Straight.
consistently.
Yep.
Yeah, straight without a break.
Yep. And so
Yep.
kudos to them as well,
Sure.
even though they're a team I like to hate at times.
Well, I mean, I think that some, let's call it some PG rated bad blood isn't bad for the league. I think that things can get to an extreme, and where you have fans honestly believing that the referees are calling games to spite their teams. That's not the way it works. It's my pet peeve with some of the in-game chats, that it's always the referee's fault when your team doesn't get the results that they want. But ultimately, they don't care who wins. They really don't.
Yeah. If there's any bias, they might be irritated by a player having yelled at them and cursed them out, but I think otherwise that's probably just a slight bias if any. So
Sure. Well, and their
they're human.
players, yeah, not that game in particular, just say general around the field. There are players who develop reputations and in some cases rightfully develop reputations. And so it's just like life, Dad. If you're around people who uh, cause trouble, subconsciously you may assume that something they do is troublemaking, even if the intent wasn't there. And so it's a human game. The referees are human. With as much criticism I've heard about video review, I don't think we want robots calling games in this league or any league. And so, yeah, this stuff is going to happen.
No doubt. Anything else we need to cover today, sir?
No, other than when we come back next week, we'll have a summary of two games this weekend and then look ahead to two games the next weekend. I think for the Comets, it's going to be really, really good to get back home to Cable Dom Arena. They left home with a bad taste in their mouth, dropping what should have been a 3-point win to Utica. And so I think that they're going to want to prove something against Tacoma. And as I said, Tacoma is a team you can't look past. They're really good on the road. Anytime Nick Pereira has his foot on the ball, great things can happen.
No doubt. So I'm going to take the highlight from the last few games is that the Comets were in at least 3 of those 5 games. Maybe not even as far out as a couple of them, the ones that they weren't that close, but so they're not that far off from maybe getting right back on track and getting the win streak going again. So, but they need to, and we will see how that turns out.
We absolutely will.
Appreciate the time, sir, and we'll talk to you sometime in the next few days, and we are out.